To the Korean peninsula next, where a fast-developing arms race between North and South Korea is set to go hypersonic. Last week, North Korea claimed to have tested a hypersonic missile for the second time in 5 months. South Korea has dismissed the claim. Now, whatever the truth, the danger posed by hypersonic missiles is very real. Compared to ballistic missiles, hypersonic missiles fly more than 5 times the speed of sound, oftentimes faster than that too. And their direction can also be changed mid-flight. Think of it as a stone you have thrown, but then are able to change its direction and speed as it flies through the air. This makes hypersonic missiles very hard to detect by traditional missile defense systems. For instance, a hypersonic missile fired between Pyongyang and Seoul would take just seconds to reach its target, a distance of nearly 200 kilometers. Now, North Korea claims it possesses such weapons, and this year, South Korea intends to test its own hypersonic missiles. Keeping an eye on this for us is correspondent Frank Smith in Seoul. Frank, there are reports that South Korea plans to test its own hypersonic missiles this year. Is this the start of a hypersonic missile race on the Korean peninsula?
Well, I think it's fair to say it is. It's possibly even fair to speculate that this has been happening for some time. South Korea has said that it's been developing hypersonic missile capabilities since the early 2000s, ramping up those development efforts in the 2010s. And it also says that the hypersonic missile that it will be testing and deploying perhaps later in the 2020s is better than the one that was tested just days ago by North Korea. The South Korean hypersonic missile will be a hypersonic cruise missile capable of flying its entire flight at a very low altitude and at that hypersonic high speed, making it more difficult to detect than the missile that North Korea recently tested, which initially had a ballistic missile parabolic phase that could be detected. And as you mentioned, it only takes, reports say, 75 seconds for this cruise-type hypersonic missile to theoretically reach Pyongyang from Seoul here in South Korea.
Now, Frank, we're used to North Korea regularly carrying out weapons tests, but last year itself, South Korea tested submarine-launched missiles and rockets. Why is Seoul arming itself like never before?
There are a few reasons for this. South Korea has been building up its military over the past couple of decades, since about 2020 under Kim Dae-jung. But the missile development has really taken off over the past year, especially as an agreement between South Korea and the United States released South Korea from limitations on its payload and range of its ballistic missiles. South Korea has also made efforts to try to develop a more independent security structure.
Yet you have South Korean President Moon Jae-in speaking of dialogue with the North. I mean, that's what he said after the recent North Korean missile test. Are Moon Jae-in's hopes for peace talks rapidly evaporating ahead of a presidential election in March?
Well, I think that's fair to say. In order for peace talks to take place on the Korean peninsula, first they have to involve the United States and North Korea. They have to involve denuclearization, or at least arms control. Right now, the U.S. really isn't interested in negotiating with North Korea because it has other, more important items on its foreign policy and domestic agenda, given the Omicron COVID-19 situation there. Also, North Korea, for its part, really felt that it, got pushed around at the Hanoi negotiations with former U.S. President Donald Trump, failing to secure any type of agreement there, while coming to that negotiating table, with an offer and some concessions. Things could change here, though, with the election coming up, as you mentioned. Lee Jae-myung is a progressive. He's another liberal left-winger like current President Moon Jae-in, and he may want to reach out to North Korea once again.
Frank Smith in Seoul. We'll leave it there for the time being, but thank you so much for joining us today.